I'm filthy, inside and out, she said, her voice shaking in the cold mountain air. The townsfolk just laughed, dragging her through the mud like she wasn't worth a penny. But one silent mountain man saw something different, something the world had missed. He didn't buy her for lust or pity. He bought her freedom. Up on that frozen mountain, she finds not judgment, but a fire that could burn her shame clean. Yet secrets buried in her father's stolen maps draw danger straight to their door. When gunmen come for her, the truth she carries could save a whole people or get them all killed. Snow falls, the church bell tolls. Can a woman who calls herself filthy ever believe she's been made clean? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Grayson Boone rode into Silver Junction near noon, his bay gelding picking a careful path through slush and cinder. A thin sun hung over the peaks. Smoke from the roundhouse made a gray veil across the sky. The rail spur clanked and hissed as a shunter eased a line of empty ore cars past the water tower. A blackbird perched on a telegraph wire and chattered at the noise. The wind carried the smell of coal, horse, and the faint sweetness of sawdust from Jensen's planing mill. Grayson sat tall in the saddle, lean as a fence rail, coat patched at the elbows. Snow lay in the wrinkles of his hat. The cold struck his cheeks and stung his eyes, but he did not hurry. He did not hurry much for anything anymore. He had learned that the mountain did not answer to fast men. He came for salt, caps for his hawken, and a sack of flour to stretch the winter. The list sat in his breast pocket. He had written it the night before by lamp, his letters slow and square. He had also told himself he would not tarry. He liked town about as much as a bad tooth, but he needed supplies. He needed them before the real storms came down like a door slamming shut. His horse clopped off the frozen ruts onto the main street. Silver Junction sat like a handful of dice thrown across a bench of land. Depot and water tank at one end, church and school near the middle, the jail and the marshal's office by a little square, and the saloon right where a thirsty man would see it first. The boardwalk creaked. Somewhere, a baby cried, and then went quiet. Somewhere, a piano tried and failed to make a tune. He saw it then, saw the knot of men on the saloon porch, their coats open, faces red with drink. They had a woman by the elbows and were hauling her down the steps. She stumbled, one shoe missing. The other hung by a broken lace. Her hair looked like a bird's nest had fallen on her head. Ash and soot smeared her cheek and collarbone. Her dress had once been blue, but now was the color of old dishwater. "Get, you hear?" one man barked. "Marshal says sundown. I say now." The woman did not fight. She laughed, but the sound had no joy in it. It came out thin and rough, like a saw biting a nail. She looked at the street, as if it were a river she had to cross, and there was no bridge. Grayson pulled his horse short and watched. He did not like the way the men handled her. He did not like the way the rest of the porch looked on and did nothing. He did not like the way something old, buried in him, rose up hot. Marshal Pike stood near the steps, with his thumbs hooked in his belt. Pike was not a cruel man, but he had a lazy kind of law that bent with the weather and the loudest voice. He tipped his hat to Grayson as if this were just a chore and not a picture a man would carry to his dying day. "She made a mess," Pike said to no one and to everyone. "We ain't got room for mess today." A boy with a mop and a bucket waited by the door. He looked at the woman with wide eyes. He looked like he wanted to set the bucket down and help, but he did not. The woman lifted her head. Her eyes were rimmed red. She spoke clear, though her voice trembled with cold and shame. "Don't bother," she said. "I'm filthy, inside and out." The street went quiet the way it does when a hawk shadows a field. Even the piano in the saloon fell still. The words hung there, sharp as icicles. Grayson felt them hit the sore places in his chest. He saw another woman in his mind, hair pale as straw, lying under a damp sheet while the smallpox scabbed her face and stole her breath. He remembered the way smoke had tasted the night the saloon burned after the fever, how he had lifted timbers that were too hot to hold, how his wife had already been gone, and still he had tried to carry her out. He remembered the smell of lye and the sound of a hymn sung to a coffin that seemed too small for so much love. He swung down from the saddle. His boots sank a little in the slush. He tied the reins to a hitch post and walked toward the steps. The nearest man, a broad fellow with a bristled jaw, lifted his chin. "Ain't your affair, Boone?" "It is now," Grayson said. He kept his voice even, steady as a plumb line. He looked at the marshal. "What's the complaint?" Pike shifted his weight. "Disorderly. Drunk last night. Broke Miss Liza's lamp. Said words to a deacon's wife." "She breathed," the bristle-jawed man said with a dirty chuckle. "A woman on the porch, one of the church ladies, went pink and turned away." Grayson looked at the woman in the men's grip. She could not meet his eye. She stared past him like a person on a gallows might look at the sky. He saw the cut on her bottom lip. He saw her hands. They were not soft hands. They were work hands, nicked and raw. "What will satisfy the law?" Grayson asked. Pike scratched his jaw. "Well now, she owes a fine to square the lamp and my time, and the saloon says she should leave. $8 would close the book, or a mule. The book says a mule buys a lot of peace." Grayson let out a breath. He had 2 animals with him, the bay he rode, and a pack mule named Buck. Buck had carried his salt, his traps, and part of his life for 3 good years. Buck did not complain much. Buck stepped where a smart pack animal should step. Grayson felt something pull tight in his chest. He also felt the pull ease when he looked again at the woman's face. He nodded once. "I'll settle the fine." The bristle-jawed man spat into the snow. "You'll what, for that?" "For her," Grayson said. He put a hand on his pocket and pulled free his small pouch. $3 in coins clinked inside. Not near enough. He looked past the marshal toward the livery. "And the mule." Pike blinked. "Your mule?" "A mule," Grayson said. "Take him. You'll find him tied beside my packs. Name's Buck." The noise on the porch rose like starlings. Laughter, a few curses, a few muttered, "Well, I'll be." The church lady raised a hand to her mouth, and then lowered it and squared her shoulders like she had chosen a side and would stand there. Pike looked at Grayson a long moment. "You sure?" Grayson did not take his eyes from the woman. "I'm sure." "All right," the marshal said, lifting his hands as if to settle a dust cloud. "Fine's paid. Mule is taken in lieu of the balance. You sign a chit and she's clear in my book." He looked at the woman. "But you, out by sundown. That part holds." The men loosened their grip. The woman's knees bent as if they might give way, but she gathered herself. She pressed her lips together and tried to straighten her hair. It would not straighten. She made a little sound that could have been a laugh or a sob. It did not matter which. Both came from the same deep well. Grayson stepped to the porch rail where Pike placed a paper on a crate and set a stub pencil beside it. Grayson's hand looked big and brown and chapped against the white. He wrote his name slow. He was not a fast hand, but his letters stood firm. The bristle-jawed man leaned close. His breath smelled of rye. "Boone," he said, and nudged the woman's shoulder with 2 fingers. "You know she ain't no wife to take to a cabin." Grayson looked at the fingers touching her dress. He lifted his own hand and laid it flat on the man's wrist. Just 2 fingers, light as if he were checking a pulse. "Take your hand off," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The man snatched his wrist back. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" "No," Grayson said. "I reckon I'm worse, most days." He glanced at the woman. "But I can carry my own sins. I don't need to drag hers." Pike slid the chit into his pocket. "We're done here," he told the men. "Let the lady stand." She stood. Slowly. Grayson saw the fight it took. She pulled her shawl tight across her shoulders. The fabric was thin and smelled like old smoke. She looked at Grayson at last, quick as a sparrow, and then away. "Why?" she asked. Just that one word. He considered a dozen answers. None seemed to fit until he remembered a hymn line that had lived under his ribs even when he would not sing. "Because a hand should pull up," he said, "when it could push down." She stared at him as if the words did not make sense, and then as if they did, but she did not trust them yet. "What do you want from me?" "Work," he said. "Cooking, sweeping, fire-keeping, just for a season. Then you can go where you choose." A man in the back barked a laugh. "He bought himself a housewife with a mule, boys." Grayson did not even look back. "I bought a little peace," he said. "Let me leave with it." Pike stepped down from the porch and held out his hand to the woman. "You heard him. The law ain't got hold of you now." He paused. "Miss." She took the marshal's hand as if it were a strange tool she had never used before. She stepped onto the street. Slush soaked her stocking foot. She flinched. Grayson shrugged out of his coat and placed it across her shoulders. The cold bit him hard at once, but he held his face steady. "You'll freeze," she said. "I'll be all right," he said. "We won't be long in town." He led her toward the mercantile. Folks turned to look and then turned away when he met their eyes. He did not glare. He just stood like a tree you had to go around. Inside the mercantile, it smelled of flour, kerosene, and oranges long gone dry. Mills, the owner, lifted his brows. "Boone, need your usual?" "Flour, salt, caps," Grayson said. He looked at the woman. "And socks." She looked at the floor. "You don't have to. I know what feet feel like when they're wet too long," he said. "Socks." Mills brought a small stack to the counter. He set down a pair of wool stockings, then hesitated and added another. He found a bar of lye soap and put it on top without ringing it up. His wife, behind the curtain, parted the fabric and looked out with soft eyes. She walked around the counter and stood before the woman. "You come back here," Mrs. Mills said, not unkindly. "I'll find you a shawl that won't let that wind cut you in half." The woman shook her head. "I can't pay." Mrs. Mills put a hand on her arm. "Pay me by taking care of yourself." The woman let herself be led to the back, where a crate served as a sewing box and a potbelly stove clicked as it cooled. Grayson could hear quiet talk and the rustle of wool. He paid for the other goods, and Mills said, low, "You sure, Boone?" "No one else looked sure," Grayson answered. Mills nodded once. "You be careful. Talbot's men are feeling big." "I'll keep to my own side of the mountain," Grayson said. The curtain opened. The woman returned, now wrapped in a plain gray shawl with a tight weave. The color made her eyes look deeper, like a creek after rain. She held the soap and socks as if they were too fine for her hands. "Thank you," she said. Her voice had dropped to a steady note. Mrs. Mills squeezed her elbow. "Name?" The woman hesitated, then lifted her chin. "Alina," she said. "Alina Duval." Mrs. Mills's eyes did not flinch. "Alina, I'm Rosie. You send word if you need mending thread." She lowered her voice. "And if anyone speaks rough, You tell them Rosie Mills has laundry for their tongues." A smile tugged at the corner of Alina's mouth. It was small, but it was there. "Much obliged," she whispered. Grayson gathered the flour and salt into his pack, slid the caps into a pocket tin, and balanced the rest. He nodded to Mills and Rosie, then stepped back into the cold. The sun had sunk lower, laying purple under the clouds. They crossed to the livery, where old Clement sat on a stool rubbing liniment into a mare's knee. He looked up and squinted. "Boone, Marshall said you gave your mule for the town's peace. That right?" Grayson's throat worked. "That's right." Clement shook his head, half pity, half respect. "World don't often get that kind of trade. I'll see Buck is fed." "See, he's warm," Grayson said. "He always hated a draft." Clement's eyes softened. "I figured as much. He's already got the best stall." Grayson untied his horse and slung the packs. He turned to Alina. "Can you walk a spell?" She nodded. "I can walk?" He led the bay down the street. They passed the church, where Pastor Whitlow stood in the doorway sweeping the steps. The pastor paused and watched them. He did not call out. He simply lifted his chin in a small blessing. Grayson tipped his hat in return. They passed the telegraph. Mrs. Bell stood inside, tapping a key with crisp clicks. She looked up and met Alina's eyes and gave a single, firm nod as if to say, "You are seen." Alina lowered her gaze and gripped the shawl tighter. At the end of town, near the water tower, a line of men in company coats smoked and spit and watched. One of them, square-shouldered with a pale scar on his jaw, leaned against a post and smiled without heat. "Look there," he said. "A hero and his project." Grayson kept moving. Alina kept pace. The men's talk fell behind them like stones tossed at a wagon wheel, noisy, then gone. They reached the last house, where the boardwalk ended and the wagon tracks narrowed. The land rolled away, brown grass showing beneath a skin of snow. The road-up canyon cut between stands of fir. A low bank of cloud edged the ridge like wool packed into a seam. Grayson stopped and turned to Alina. "Once we start, we won't likely come back before spring," he said. "You still choose to go?" She looked past him towards the trees. Her breath made a pale plume. "You could leave me at the edge," she said, "and go on alone." "I could," he agreed, "but I won't." "Why not?" "Because I said I wouldn't," he said, "and because there's a stove up there. That is warmer than this wind. A person ought not freeze when there's a stove that can be fed." She swallowed. "I don't know how to be good," she said, the last word catching like a stitch on a nail. "Not anymore." He considered, then answered as bland as a man offering coffee. "You don't need to be anything today. You just need to step when I step and keep breathing. We'll see about tomorrow when it gets here." They started. He walked with the reins in his hand. She walked on the other side of the horse, one hand on the pack strap, the other holding the shawl closed at her throat. The snow at the road's edge squeaked under their boots. A magpie hopped from stump to stump, scolding. The wind picked up and sifted powder across the ruts like flour on a board. They did not talk much. There was the sound of leather creaking, the horse's breath, Grayson's steady steps, Alina's steps that tried to be steady and sometimes were. A mile passed, then another. The town fell away behind them as if someone had drawn a curtain on a stage, and the picture had changed. Grayson watched the sky the way a man watches a horse's ears. He knew what was coming. He pointed to a break in the timber where a lean-to of old poles leaned still. "We'll stop there a bit," he said. "Warm your feet." Alina did not argue. When they reached the shelter, he tied the horse to a low branch and knocked old snow from the lean-to with his glove. He gathered deadfall and lit a small fire that did more for the spirit than for the cold, but it was something. He poured water from his canteen into a blackened cup and set it near the coals. He cut 2 slices of jerky and handed one to Alina. "Chew slow," he said. She obeyed, though the salt made the cracks at her lips sting. She held her hands to the heat and then pressed her fingers against her cheeks. Color slowly returned. She looked at him over the firelight. "You don't even know me," she said. He stirred the coals with a stick. "I know what it is to be cold," he said, "and tired, and done with yourself." She looked into the fire and did not speak for a while. Then, very soft, "Alina," she said, as if reminding herself. "My name is Alina." He tipped his head. "Grayson." She nodded. "I know." He let a faint smile touch his mouth and then fade. He poured the warmed water into the cup and held it out. "Drink. We have a hill to climb yet." They walked again. The road narrowed to a track where wagon wheels had bit in late fall and then frozen. They crossed a little swale where ice lay under snow. Grayson stepped first and tested each place. When he found a slick patch, he turned and set his palm out. Alina took it and stepped across. Her hand shook, but her gaze stayed up. "Thank you," she said each time. It sounded like a habit she was learning again. They passed a split rail fence, half fallen. A crow lifted from it and beat black wings into white air. Far off, a train whistle cried, and then fell away behind the ridge. The sound made the hair at Grayson's nape lift. It always did. He could not hear a whistle without thinking of how fast man thought he ought to go and how slow his heart caught up. Afternoon thinned. The light turned a tired yellow, and then a kind of iron gray. The clouds shoved lower, as if the mountain had shrugged them down. Grayson counted the miles in his head. He counted the switchbacks. There would be the notch with the wind-cut rock. There would be the little slide where he always had to lead the horse single. There would be the creek ford with its brown stones, slick in any season. At the notch, the wind blew a steady knife. Alina's shawl snapped against her shoulders. Grayson stepped into the wind and put his own body between her and the worse of it. He said nothing. Saying something would have made it smaller than it was. The wind did not like to be told what to be. At last they reached the creek. It ran thin and cold over stones glazed with clear ice. Grayson looked up and down, found the place he trusted, and led the horse across. Then he turned. "You first or last?" he asked. She looked at the water as if it might rise up and pull her under. "Last," she said. "All right," he said. He stepped back over, took her elbow, and pointed her boot at a stone. "This one, then that. Don't look at the water. Look at where you will be next." She did as told. She slipped once and gasped. He tightened his grip and set her steady again. When they reached the far bank, she let out a breath she had held too long. He did not let go of her arm until he felt the tremor ease. "Better," he said. "I ain't much use," she said. "You walked," he said. "That's use enough for today." The trail rose in a long curve. The firs stood close now, trunks dark with wet. The world smelled of pitch and cold rock. Snow began to fall, soft as ash at first, and then more sure. Each flake found a place on Alina's shawl and stayed. Grayson's cabin came at last like a square of shadow tucked among the trees. One window. One door. A lean-to shed tacked to the side for wood and tools. He had built it with his own hands from spruce that had grown on this hill, shaping each log until it joined true. He loved it without saying so. He loved the way it leaked light in the evening like a lantern set in a jack-o'-lantern shell. He loved the way the stovepipe talked in wind. He saw it through Alina's eyes. and saw also the mouse droppings he had not swept, and the soot that would blacken a woman's hand when she touched the kettle hook. He saw the barrel half full of water, and guessed it was half ice by now. He saw the cot that sagged, and the blanket that would need airing. He opened the door and stepped back, letting her go in first. He did that not because she was a lady, and not because he wanted to show manners, though both were true. He did it because the first breath of cabin air was always warmer when you had been in the wind, and he wanted her to have that feeling. The room smelled of pine pitch, iron, and the faint ghost of last night's coffee. He set the packs on the table, a rough plank laid across sawhorse legs. He crossed to the stove, opened its belly, and saw coals still holding a small red eye. "Well now," he said, pleased despite himself. He added kindling and blue until the eye widened, and grabbed a stick and then another. He laid 2 splits across and shut the door. The stove answered with a deep sigh, as if it had been waiting to come back to life. Alina stood in the middle of the room, shawl clutched, looking at everything like a person stepping into a church for the first time. She did not move until he pointed. "Hook's there," he said, and hung his hat on it so she would not think it was only for a better sort of person. She followed, slipped off the shawl, and hung it too. Her hair fell in a tangle down her back. She lifted her hands to it and stopped, as if not sure she had the right to try. "You'll want to warm water," he said, busying himself so she would not feel eyes on her. "Bucket's there. Ladle. There's a tin basin. Soap's new." She found the basin and held it as if it were a small gift. "May I?" He nodded toward the door. "There's the creek for a full wash come daylight. Tonight, get the soot off your face and hands. The rest can wait. Close the shutter if you like. I'll step out and see to the horse." She looked at him quick, fear a spark in her eye. Don't take long." "I won't," he said. "Just tying him where the wind can't knife him?" Outside, the snow had grown bolder. It ticked against his hat brim. He rubbed the bay's neck and spoke low. "You done good," he told the animal. "You earned a nosebag and a rub." He set the horse under the lean-to, checked the rope twice, and brushed the damp from the animal's flank with his sleeve. He thought of Buck, and felt the ache of that trade like a bruise you press without meaning to. "Be warm, old friend," he said to the absent mule. He knew it was foolish to talk to a beast he had left, but love often looked foolish in the eyes of men who did not carry it. He stepped back inside. Warmth met him, thin yet real. The shutter was pulled. Alina stood by the table, sleeves pushed to her elbows, face wet and pink where she had scrubbed. The line of ash at her throat had lightened. The wound on her lip looked clean. She had found a comb and worked it through a small part of her hair. It would take a week to smooth the rest, but a start was a start. He set a skillet on the stove and cut slices of salt pork. The meat hissed and threw a good smell into the room. He measured coffee into the pot and set it at the back, where it would not boil hard and go bitter. He dropped a small lump of brown sugar into the beans he had soaked and smiled to himself. It was a thing his wife had done, and it had seemed foolish then, too sweet for hard food, but he had found he missed it when he did not. "Sit," he said. "You'll fall over if you don't." She sat on the edge of the cot, and then moved to a chair when he nodded at it. He did not take the cot himself. He would later, after she slept, roll a blanket on the bench beneath the window. For now he cooked, and the act calmed him the way planing a board square calms a carpenter. It was something a man could do right. The fire found its voice. The stovepipe hummed in the wind's key, and snow ticked its own soft rhythm on the roof. He set plates on the table, a tin fork and a knife whose handle he had wrapped with leather when the wood had split. He tore the loaf of yesterday's bread and warmed it by the stove door. Alina watched, her eyes following each simple act as if he were performing some fine trick. She cleared her throat. "I can cook," she said, almost defiant. "I know," he said. "Tomorrow you can prove it. Tonight you can eat." She looked down. "All right." They ate with the quiet of hungry people who have nothing to say to food but thank you. The pork was salty and hot. The beans were soft. The bread soaked up the fat. The coffee steamed and put heat into hands and bellies. After a while, when the edge had gone from their hunger, he bowed his head. He did not speak at first. The old words did not come easy. His mouth felt like a gate that had been stuck in its hinges too long. He tried anyway. "Thank you for food," he said, the words small and plain, "and for a roof and for another try." He lifted his head. Alina had not bowed hers, but she had watched his hands as if they explained the prayer better than his voice had. She nodded once, almost to herself. When the plates were mostly clean, he stood and set them in a pan with a little hot water. "We'll wash and set away," he said. "Then sleep." Alina rose and reached for the cloth. Their hands knocked against each other, and each pulled back as if the other were hot metal. Then they both released a breath and tried again, moving around the small table in a slow dance as old as any marriage and as new as any truce. When the dishes were done and the pan dried and hung, he took a blanket and laid it across the bench. "I'll take this," he said. "You take the cot. Doors barred there if you wish." He pointed to the stout board that slid across 2 iron brackets. "I'll wake if it knocks." She stood with the shawl in her hands, the room's lamplight drawing soft lines across her face. She looked at the bar, at him, at the stove. She looked at the small window where the shutter had been pushed back a thumb's width to let night peep in. "I don't know how to be safe," she said, almost like questioning the word. "You learn it by sleeping and waking and finding yourself still here," he said. "It takes a while." She slid the bar and let it rest in the brackets. The wood made a good, honest sound as it settled. She took one step toward the cot and then turned, as if pulled by a thread she could not name. "Why a mule?" she asked. "Why something so dear?" He thought of Buck's careful feet, the years of cramped trails, the way the mule had leaned into a climb because Grayson had leaned too. He thought of a grave on a windy hill, and a marriage bed taken apart because he could not bear to look at it. He looked at the stove instead of her eyes. "Because you were worth more," he said simply. She did not argue. Perhaps she did not believe him. It did not matter yet. Belief comes slow as spring in the high country. He turned down the lamp. He banked the fire with 2 shovels of ash. He listened to the quiet that came in behind the day like a soft-footed friend. Outside, the wind dropped. The trees made a hush like prayer. The first real flakes of the storm fell sure and steady, filling tracks and erasing lines, covering the day's unkind prints with clean, white mercy. They would need that mercy in the days to come. But for now, on this first night, the mountain held them. The lantern on the nail by the door swung once, a small circle of light in the dim. Grayson lay on the bench, boots set under it, coat rolled as a pillow. Alina turned on the cot and pulled the shawl to her chin. He closed his eyes and saw again the street, the porch, the girl whose laugh had not been a laugh. He saw also the small change in her face when she had tasted hot food and warm coffee, and the sound of a bar that promised rest. He lay very still. He was not a man for many words, even in his own head. But he let one word float up and sit near him as the stove ticked and the snow found the roof. Home. Near midnight, the latch string moved a hair with the cabins settling. Grayson's eyes opened at once. He lay silent, listening. Only wind and the faint creak of timber. He let the breath go slow. He rolled a shoulder to ease a knot, and then smiled into the dark at the foolish, boyish feeling that rose in him for just a second, light as a spark. He had done one thing right today. Toward dawn, the stove's heat faded to a gentle glow. The cold began to press against the walls again. Before it grew sharp, Grayson rose and fed the fire 2 splits. Sparks climbed like stars in the dim. He set the coffee pot near the mouth of the stove and moved without noise, a man who knew how to let a second soul rest. Outside, the storm deepened. The mountain took their tracks and hid them. The world shrank to a cabin, a stove, a table, a bench, a cot, 2 hearts, and the sound of snow. And in that small world, something that had been thin as a last thread thickened enough to hold. A fragile, new chance. When the light finally crept under the shutter and turned the room gray-blue, he set the tin cups near the stove and reached for the latch. He paused and looked back at the cot. Alina's breathing was even, her cheek pressed into the pillow. A lock of hair lay across her mouth. She did not look filthy. She looked like a person who had walked a long road in a thin wind and found a door that opened. He lifted the bar and opened the door to the morning. Snow fell quiet and steady, as if it had been falling all his life and would fall when he was gone. He stepped onto the porch. The lantern there swung a little in the draft, and the first chill breath of the day touched his face. He smiled into it. Behind him, a blanket rustled. The day had begun. The long work of mending would begin with it. Step by step, breath by breath, fire by fire, each small act held up against the cold. Grayson lit the porch lantern for their journey out of town the evening before and had kept it on the peg. Now it hung still, a memory of their leaving. He reached out, set it steady, and thought of the road they had walked and the one ahead. Then he turned back inside to the stove, to the cups, to the simple kindness of heat, and to whatever words might be needed next. The morning broke pale and cold, the kind of mountain morning that began with silence, so thick it almost felt holy. When Grayson opened the cabin door, the air cut sharp against his face, clean and bright. The snow from the night before lay deep enough to hide their tracks. Smoke from the stove rose in a slow column that drifted toward the timberline. He stood a moment, breathing it in. The smell of snow and pine needles mixed with wood smoke, a scent he had come to trust. Behind him came the sound of a blanket stirring, then Alina's voice, soft and uncertain. "Is it morning already?" He turned, the light behind him throwing a gold edge on his coat. "It is. The fire's holding steady. Coffee's near ready." She pushed herself up on one elbow, blinking toward the stove. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders in dark waves that caught the light. For a heartbeat, she looked years younger, unburdened by the memories that had chased her up the mountain. "I thought maybe I'd dreamed this place," she said. "The quiet don't seem real." "It'll seem real enough once you fetch water," Grayson answered, a wry edge in his voice. She gave him a look that might have been half a smile. "You mean I'm to work already?" "You said you could," he said. "Best to start with what's small." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups. She wrapped her fingers around hers and held it close to her mouth, letting the steam warm her face. The rich, bitter smell filled the cabin. After a few sips, she stood and reached for her shawl. "Where's the creek?" He nodded toward the door. 50 steps east, down the path. Barrel by the wall needs filling. You'll find the dipper hanging on a peg. Alina hesitated, then nodded and stepped into the cold. Grayson watched her from the doorway. She walked slow but steady, her skirts brushing the snow. The sun caught the frost in her hair until it glittered like threads of silver. She knelt by the creek, broke the thin ice, and filled the pail. The water sloshed up her wrists, making her gasp. But she didn't stop. When she came back, cheeks red, she was smiling for the first time in a long while. "It's colder than death," she said, setting the pail down. "Good," Grayson said. "Cold keeps a person awake." He took the bucket from her and poured the water into the barrel by the stove. She rubbed her hands, blowing on her fingers. "What do you do up here all day?" He considered the question. "Work, mostly. Trap lines 2 miles west. Wood cutting when it's dry, listen to wind." "And no people?" He shook his head. "Not unless you count the occasional trader or fool lost in snow." She nodded slowly. "Seems lonely." "It was," he said. "Less so now." Her eyes lifted to his face, uncertain what to do with the warmth she heard in his voice. Grayson cleared his throat. "I'll show you how to bank the fire and make biscuits proper. After that, I'll check the traps before the next storm. You'll stay here, keep the place warm, and mend what's torn." Alina took in a slow breath and nodded. "I can manage that." They worked side by side for an hour. He showed her how to stir lard into flour with 2 fingers until it turned crumbly. She rolled the dough on the table, her hands clumsy but willing. He watched her move, careful, precise, as though afraid to make a mistake that might cost her the roof over her head. "Don't fret," he said. "You ain't gonna spoil anything that can't be scraped off." Her laugh, small but real, filled the cabin like sunlight. When the biscuits were baking, Grayson pulled on his coat and strapped his rifle across his back. "If someone comes, don't open the door unless they call my name," he said. "And don't waste firewood. Use small splits till I'm back." She looked towards the window. "Will you be gone long?" "Back by dusk," he said. "If I'm not, I'll be close." Alina watched him vanish into the trees. The wind tugged at his coat until he became only a dark shape against the white. Then there was nothing but quiet, the kind that could either comfort or break a person. Inside, she cleaned. She swept the floor with the old broom, chased out the ashes from the hearth, and scrubbed the basin until it gleamed. She found a torn sleeve on one of Grayson's shirts and set to stitching it, her fingers stiff but steady. Each small task gave her something to believe in again. When she paused, she looked at the Bible lying on the shelf near the bed. Its leather cover was cracked, its pages edged with dust. She stared at it for a long while before she dared to touch it. Her father's name, J. Duval, was faintly written on the inside cover. A memory flickered. His voice, his hands tracing maps by lantern light, the smell of ink and tobacco. She closed it quickly, as if it might burn her fingers. Outside, wind sighed through the pines. Grayson followed his trap line through the draw, checking each iron set half buried in snow. A rabbit, 2 weasels, enough to keep the smokehouse busy. He moved with a steady rhythm, his mind half on the work and half on the woman waiting in his cabin. He'd known broken people before, drifters, men ruined by whiskey or guilt. But she was different. There was fight in her still, even if she hadn't noticed it yet. He found boot prints near the last trap, too deep for his own. 3 sets leading downhill toward the new grading road. Company men, no doubt. He crouched, touched the frozen prints, and frowned. They were fresh. When he returned near sundown, smoke rose from the chimney. He opened the door to find the cabin warmer, brighter. The biscuit sat cooling on the table, golden and imperfect. Alina looked up from mending a torn quilt. "You came back," she said, half in relief. "I said I would," he answered, hanging his rifle by the door. "You did fine here." She smiled faintly. "Didn't burn the place down, if that's what you mean." He chuckled. "That's better than most apprentices manage." He poured coffee while she dished out stew from the kettle. They ate quietly, the way people do who haven't yet found the shape of their talk. After a while, Grayson spoke. "There were men in the draw," he said. "3, from the look of it. Company hands, most likely." Her spoon paused mid-air. "Looking for me?" "Maybe, or scouting. But I'd wager both." Fear flared in her eyes, but he shook his head. "They didn't come this far. We'll stay watchful." She nodded, her hand trembling slightly. "I thought I'd left that life behind. It keeps following." "Things that matter usually do," he said softly. They finished supper as dusk turned the window glass to silver. Afterward, Alina took up the Bible again. Grayson noticed but said nothing. She turned the pages slow, tracing her father's notes in the margins, measurements, place names, faint sketches of rivers. A single seam in the spine looked thicker than the rest. She pressed it lightly with her thumb. Something crinkled inside, faint but real. Grayson saw her expression shift. "What is it?" She shook her head. "I don't know yet." She shut the Bible and set it aside. "Tomorrow." He let it be. The wind rose outside, rattling the door latch. He stood and checked it, laying the bar in place. "Snow's coming again," he said. "Best keep close." That night, the storm returned fierce. The roof groaned. The stove hissed and popped as he fed it pine logs. Alina sat near the fire, mending another tear in silence. Grayson sat opposite, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The soft scrape filled the small room. After a while, she spoke without looking up. "Why'd you come back for me? You could have just left me there." He paused, then set the knife aside. "Because I've seen what happens when a soul's thrown away. I reckon the Lord don't make things just to let men break them." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "You think the Lord still sees me?" "I reckon he never stopped," he said simply. She bent her head, a tear slipping down her cheek, and kept sewing. Hours later, when the storm finally quieted, they both rose to bank the fire and prepare for sleep. Grayson laid his blanket on the bench again. Alina lingered by the window, peeking through the small gap in the shutter. "The snow's stopped," she whispered. "Everything looks clean again." "It always does, till morning," he said. She smiled faintly, turned back to the cot, and lay down. Grayson stretched out on the bench, his body tired but his mind full. The prints in the snow troubled him. He would need to keep his rifle loaded and his eyes open. But as the wind eased and the fire's glow turned low and steady, he let one small thought settle in his chest like an ember refusing to die. Maybe, just maybe, the Lord had sent him more than a burden that night in Silver Junction. Outside, the mountain breathed under its blanket of snow. The creek murmured somewhere in the dark, never fully still. And inside that rough-hewn cabin 2 strangers slept, one haunted by the past, the other guarding the fragile hope that tomorrow would bring something worth keeping. By dawn, the storm had eased to a fine mist of flakes, like the mountain had run out of breath but wasn't ready to stop. The trees wore white sleeves, and smoke from the cabin rose straight up into a sky the color of pewter. Inside, the warmth held steady, and the air smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and pine smoke. Grayson stood at the window, peering towards the tree line. He'd slept light, waking to every creak of timber and sigh of wind. Nothing had stirred beyond the cabin, But unease sat behind his ribs like a splinter. Those tracks he'd seen yesterday, 3 sets heading east, hadn't left his mind. Men didn't come this far up unless they had purpose. Behind him, Alina stirred. "You're up early," she said, voice rough with sleep. He nodded, still looking out. "Old habits. The woods tell their truth best before the day starts lying." She frowned a little, trying to catch his meaning. "You think someone's out there?" "I think men get lost easy in these parts," he said, turning from the window. "Sometimes on purpose." He poured coffee into her cup, then into his own. The sound of it hitting the tin filled the quiet. She wrapped her fingers around the cup and watched him. "I can keep watch while you check the traps," she said. He gave a low chuckle. "You'd freeze in 10 minutes. I'm stronger than I look." He glanced at her, her face pale from long hunger, her hands still raw from scrubbing the floorboards the day before. "I don't doubt that," he said softly, "but there's no sense courting trouble." They ate breakfast in silence. Afterward, Grayson pulled on his coat and strapped the rifle to his back. He'd planned to go west toward his outer line, but something told him to check the south ridge instead. He'd seen a flicker of movement there near dusk yesterday. Maybe a deer, maybe not. Before he left, he turned to her. "If someone comes, keep the bar on the door. Don't open unless it's me." Alina nodded, gripping the cup tight. "How will I know it's you?" "I'll say the word mercy," he said. "Not many up here would think to use it." When he stepped outside, the air hit him sharp enough to sting. The snow squeaked under his boots, and the rifle felt cold against his shoulder. He moved through the trees, slow and deliberate, his eyes scanning for any sign of life. Halfway down the ridge, he found a boot print half buried under new snow. Deep heel, square toe. Company issue. He crouched, brushing away the powder until the full print showed. Then he found another beside it. 2 sets, side by side, leading toward the creek. He followed for maybe a mile before the tracks cut into a narrow hollow where the wind couldn't reach. And there he saw it, a small splash of blood on the snow, bright as a rose petal. He knelt, touching it with a gloved finger. It was fresh. Something rustled in the brush ahead. Grayson lifted his rifle and waited. A groan broke the silence, weak and ragged. He pushed through the pines, and what he found made him still his breath. A boy lay crumpled in the snow, barely clothed for the weather. His dark hair was matted with ice, and his left leg was torn open where a bullet had grazed it. His skin had that waxy look that meant the cold was taking hold. Grayson dropped to one knee. "Easy, son," he murmured. "You're hurt." The boy stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Water," he whispered. "Please." Grayson pulled his canteen and tilted it to the boy's lips. The child drank a little, then coughed. "What's your name?" Grayson asked. The boy hesitated, his accent thick but clear. "Micah." Grayson felt something tighten in his chest. The name sounded like a prayer spoken by accident. "All right, Micah. We'll get you warm." He wrapped his coat around the boy and lifted him carefully. The child weighed little more than a sack of grain, all bone and chill. Grayson slung him across his shoulder and started back toward the cabin, step by steady step. By the time he reached the porch, his breath came in hard gasps. The door opened before he could knock. Alina stood there, shawl around her shoulders, eyes wide. "What happened?" she asked, pulling the door wide. "Found him down by the hollow," Grayson said, carrying the boy inside. "He's been shot and near froze." She cleared the table in a flurry of movement. "Lay him here." Grayson did. The boy shivered violently, lips blue, eyes unfocused. Alina fetched blankets while Grayson stoked the stove and filled a pot with water. She moved fast and sure, her fear swallowed by purpose. "Tear those rags away," she said. "We need to clean the wound before the fever takes him." Grayson glanced at her. This was a woman who had once been tossed aside like trash, yet she gave orders now like someone born to care. He obeyed without argument. They worked together through the afternoon. The bullet had grazed the boy's thigh, leaving a deep groove but not breaking the bone. Alina cleaned it with boiled water and strips from her own underskirt. Grayson stitched the wound with his fishing needle, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. When they were done, Micah slept under a quilt near the stove. His breathing was shallow but steady. Alina sat back, wiping sweat from her brow. "He'll live," she said softly. Grayson nodded, pouring water into a tin cup. "He said his name's Micah." She froze. "Micah? That's a Ute name?" He looked up sharply. "You know their tongue?" "Some. My father worked survey lines near their land when I was little. He used to trade with them, until the company took their water rights." Her face went pale. "He was part of it." Grayson watched her closely. "Part of what?" "The maps," she said. "The lines they drew. The ones that changed everything." She rose, pacing the cabin. "They told him to move the boundary markers south. Just a few miles, they said. But that line stole half the tribe's springs." She stopped, voice breaking. "And I think this boy knows about it." Grayson looked toward the sleeping child. That would make him worth chasing. Alina turned to the window. Snow had started again, soft and relentless. "They'll come for him," she whispered. "Then we'll be ready," Grayson said. He checked the rifle, reloaded, and set it by the door. Then he turned back to her. "You did good today." She shook her head. "I only did what anyone would." "Not everyone would," he said. "Most would have shut the door." She looked at him then. Really looked. "Why didn't you?" He shrugged. "Didn't seem right." For a long moment they stood in silence, listening to the boy's breathing. Then Alina reached for the kettle and poured more water into the basin. "I'll keep watch tonight," she said. "You've done enough." Grayson smiled faintly. "You don't take orders easy." "I've had too many men give the wrong kind," she said. And for the first time, he heard strength in her voice that hadn't been there before. He didn't argue. He laid another log on the fire and settled into the chair by the wall. "We'll take turns," he said. "Every soul deserves someone awake." As night closed in, the storm deepened again. The wind howled around the cabin, pressing cold fingers through the chinks in the logs. But inside, the fire glowed bright and steady, and 3 hearts, each carrying their own scars, beat together in fragile peace. Grayson dozed a little before dawn, only to wake when Alina touched his shoulder. "He's talking," she whispered. Micah's eyes fluttered open. His voice came weak but clear. "They took our springs," he said. "The white men. They drew new lines." Alina's hand trembled as she brushed his hair back. "Do you know where the old lines are?" He nodded faintly. "In your father's book." Her breath caught. "My father's book?" "The black one," Micah said, already fading back into sleep. "It has the river inside." Grayson met Alina's eyes. "He means the Bible," he said. Alina pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking her head. "I can't. It's not possible." "Maybe it is," he said quietly. "Maybe that's why the Lord put him in our path." The fire popped, sending sparks up the stovepipe. Snow still fell outside, burying all tracks but theirs. Grayson looked toward the boy, and then to the woman beside him. The saloon girl the town had thrown away. the surveyor's daughter whose shame had hidden a secret the world had forgotten. "Seems we got more to guard than I figured," he murmured. Alina nodded slowly. "And more to answer for than I ever wanted." Grayson laid a hand on the rifle by the door. "Then we best stand ready." Outside, the dawn came pale and cold, the world scrubbed clean once more. Inside, a wounded boy slept between two strangers who had just begun to understand that the past wasn't buried at all. It was about to knock on their door. The next morning broke clear and still, the kind of calm that comes only after a heavy storm. A thin smoke rose from the cabin chimney into an empty sky, and frost sparkled on every pine needle like glass. Grayson stepped out with his rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the ridge. No new tracks. The world seemed washed and quiet again. Inside, the air smelled of warm broth. Alina stood at the stove, stirring a pot, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Micah dozed near the fire, his face pale but not fevered. The wound on his leg had stopped oozing, bound tight with clean bandages. "How's he holding?" Grayson asked, setting his rifle near the door. "Stronger," Alina said. "He drank some soup an hour ago, spoke a little in his sleep." "What did he say?" She hesitated. "Something about a river and a promise." Grayson rubbed his jaw. "Could be the old treaty." She nodded. "I think he knows more than he should." They ate a small breakfast together, keeping their voices low. Every sound, the scrape of a spoon, the crack of a log, seemed to echo louder than usual. When Grayson looked toward the door, he thought of the men who had chased this boy through the snow. They weren't gone, just waiting. He pulled on his coat. "I'll check the ridge again," he said. "Might set a snare line closer in. Don't want strangers creeping too near." Alina looked at him sharply. "You think they'll come? Back?" He met her gaze. "I think greed doesn't rest long." She nodded, pressing her lips together. "Then go. I'll stay with him." Grayson stepped outside and started up the slope behind the cabin. Snow crunched beneath his boots. He paused now and then to listen. Birdsong, the wind, the groan of an ice-cracked branch. Normal sounds, but each one made his hand hover near the rifle. He circled wide around the clearing and found nothing new except rabbit tracks and the long, silent shadow of a hawk passing overhead. When he came back to the cabin near midday, Alina met him at the door, eyes wide. "He woke up," she whispered. "He wants to speak with you." Micah sat upright by the fire, wrapped in Grayson's old wool blanket. His dark eyes were clear now, calm but guarded. Grayson knelt beside him. "You're safe here, son. No one's going to harm you." Micah studied him a long moment before nodding. "You're Boone?" "That's right. You helped my uncle once, Navi." Grayson blinked. "Your uncle's Chief Navi?" The boy nodded. "You brought him a white flag once, long ago. You didn't let the soldiers burn our fish traps." Grayson remembered. The spring thaw of '76, when a skirmish had almost turned bloody. He'd carried a truce note between a drunken lieutenant and the Ute chief, who wanted only peace. He hadn't thought anyone remembered. Micah's voice dropped low. "He told me to run when the railroad men came. Said they wanted what's under our water. The map shows where." Alina swallowed hard. "My father's map?" Micah nodded again. "He gave it to your father, thinking it was safe, but the lines were changed." Grayson stood, moving to the shelf where the Bible rested. He lifted it, feeling its weight. "This book?" Micah's eyes lit with recognition. "Yes, the map's inside. He said to find the girl with the dark hair and the sad eyes. She'd know what to do." Alina's hand trembled. "That was years ago," she whispered. "He couldn't have known—" Maybe the Lord did, Grayson said quietly. They opened the Bible together at the table. Alina found the seam she'd noticed before. With slow, careful fingers, she tugged at the loose stitching until the thread gave way. Inside lay a small folded parchment, yellowed with age. She spread it flat across the wood. Fine pencil lines traced rivers, creeks, and survey markers. One corner bore her father's initials, J.D., and beside them, another in rougher hand, N for Navi. Micah touched the spot near the upper edge. This is the spring they took. They built a pipe there now. It feeds the railroad camp. But the treaty says this belongs to our people. Grayson studied the markings. That'd be worth a fortune to men like Talbot, and proof of theft besides. Alina's voice was faint. So my father was part of this, but he hid the truth. He tried to make it right, Grayson said. This paper could still do that. Micah looked between them. Then we must take it to the agency. Miss Hart will know. Grayson nodded slowly. It's near 30 miles in good weather. 2 days' ride, maybe 3 with snow. I can travel, Micah said, trying to sit up. No, you can't, Alina said firmly, pressing him back. Not yet. Grayson rubbed the back of his neck. We'll wait a few days. Let you heal, gather strength, then we'll go together. Micah opened his mouth to protest, but Grayson lifted a hand. No argument. You stay alive first. The boy relented, closing his eyes. That afternoon passed in quiet rhythm. Grayson repaired a loose shutter. Alina boiled bandages and stirred stew. Micah slept, dreaming softly. For a brief while, the cabin felt like a home. Not for what it was, but for who it held. When dusk came, Grayson lit the lantern and set it low. The air inside was soft and golden. Alina sat mending a torn sleeve by the firelight. He reminds me of someone, she said. My brother, maybe. He died when I was a girl. Grayson looked up. How? Fever, she said simply. Same year the survey ended. After that, Father changed. He stopped talking about the land, stopped drawing. When he left for Denver, I never saw him again. You been alone since? She nodded. Mostly. The saloon took me in when my money ran out. I told myself I deserved no better. Grayson's gaze softened. You were wrong. She looked at him across the table, eyes bright in the firelight. And what about you? Who'd you lose? He hesitated, then said quietly, My wife. Smallpox took her 6 winters ago. I'm sorry. He gave a small nod. I buried her near the ridge. Haven't prayed much since. Alina looked down at the map spread between them. Maybe this is prayer enough, she said. Doing something that makes the world right again. He met her eyes. Maybe so. Later, when they banked the fire and settled in for the night, the mountain's quiet pressed close again. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, watching, waiting. In the middle of the night, a sound woke Grayson. Not wind, not trees. A faint crunch outside the door. He sat up, hand on the rifle. Alina stirred on the cot, eyes wide. Did you hear that? She whispered. He nodded, motioning her to stay still. Another sound followed. A boot scraping wood. Grayson rose silently and crossed to the door. He eased the bar free and opened it a crack. The night outside was thick with cold. Moonlight glinted on snow. At first he saw nothing. Then, down by the trees, a shadow moved. 2 men, crouched low, rifles slung. Grayson's blood turned cold. He shut the door fast and dropped the bar. They've found us, he said. Alina stood, clutching her shawl. What do we do? Keep quiet. Douse the lamp. The room fell into darkness, lit only by the faint red glow of the stove. They listened. Footsteps crunched closer. A voice outside cursed softly. Grayson moved to the window and peeked through the crack. The men were inspecting the tracks around the shed. He recognized one of them by his coat. Company brand on the sleeve. Talbot's men. He turned to Alina, whispering, "They're checking for sign. Not sure yet we're here. If we stay still, they might pass." The minutes stretched long. Then one of the men laughed. "She's up here all right," he said. "Tracks of 3. One's small. Must be the brat." Grayson's jaw tightened. The other man spat into the snow. "Talbot'll pay good once we bring the papers back. Dead or not." That was enough. Grayson's calm snapped into motion. He loaded a round into his rifle, fast and silent. "Alina, take the boy into the storage lean-to. Quiet now." She did as told, half carrying Micah, who stirred only briefly before dozing again. Grayson crouched by the window, waiting until one of the men drew closer. When the first shadow stepped near the porch, Grayson struck the door open with his shoulder, leveling the rifle. "Drop it," he barked. The man froze, hands rising. The second reached for his pistol. Grayson fired once. The crack split the night, echoing off the slopes. The man dropped into the snow with a grunt. The other bolted into the trees. Grayson stepped onto the porch, heart hammering, the cold bit hard. But he didn't feel it. He looked toward the darkness where the second man vanished. "Run," he muttered. "Tell Talbot what waits for him if he comes again." He dragged the wounded one's rifle away, then returned inside. Alina stood in the shadows, pale but steady. "Is he dead?" she asked. "Wounded. I let him crawl off. He'll carry word." Micah stirred, eyes half open. "They won't stop," he murmured. "I know," Grayson said, "but neither will we." He checked the door, reset the bar, and threw another log on the fire. Alina came to stand beside him, staring into the flames. "You risked your life for us." Grayson shook his head. "For right," he said. "That's worth more than a life spent hiding." She looked at him long, then whispered, "You make it sound easy." He smiled faintly. "It ain't. But it's simple." The three of them huddled near the fire as dawn crept slow and gray over the ridge. Outside, the snow had already covered the footprints and the blood. The mountain had erased the night's violence, leaving only silence. Grayson knew what it meant. The fight ahead would be harder than ever. But in the quiet between heartbeats, he felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose, clear and steady as the winter light through the cabin window. And for the first time, Alina looked at him not as a rescuer, but as a man she could stand beside. The morning after the gunfire, the cabin was hushed in a way that felt almost fragile. Even the wind outside seemed to move with caution, whispering through the pines instead of roaring. Grayson sat at the table, cleaning his rifle piece by piece. Every motion was slow and steady, the kind of work that kept his hands busy while his mind wrestled with the weight of what came next. Alina stood by the stove, stirring oatmeal in a dented pot. Her face looked tired but set with quiet resolve. She hadn't said much since the night before, since the men came and nearly took everything from them. Micah slept still, his head turned toward the wall, one hand resting near the edge of his quilt. His wound was healing, but his body carried the heavy stillness of exhaustion. Grayson reassembled the rifle and set it near the door. "He'll live," he said quietly, nodding towards the boy. Alina turned from the stove. "And the men who came?" "Gone," Grayson said. "One wounded, the other ran south. They'll need a day or two before they dare come back." She ladled oatmeal into 3 bowls, setting one aside for when Micah woke. "They'll tell the railroad foreman." "They will," he admitted, "but that's trouble for another day." They sat to eat, the air warm and thick with the smell of oats and wood smoke. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Alina reached into the pocket of her dress, and drew out the folded map. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "I kept thinking about what this means." Grayson leaned forward. "Tell me." She smoothed the parchment flat. "When I was a girl, my father used to talk about how every river and spring was like a line in God's handwriting, meant to stay where it was. He said moving those lines for profit was like rewriting scripture. And yet he did it." Her eyes dimmed. "He did. But I think he tried to undo it before he died. That's why he hid this map inside the Bible. It was his confession." Grayson traced the lines on the parchment with one finger. "And now it's proof." Alina nodded. "If the agency sees this, they'll know the Ute were cheated. The water belongs to them." Micah stirred at the sound of their voices. His eyes opened, still foggy from sleep. "My uncle said a paper like that could make men kill each other," he said. "It could also stop the killing," Grayson replied gently. The boy looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you must take it to Miss Hart." Alina frowned. "We'll take it, all of us." Grayson rubbed his chin. "It's near 30 miles through snow and creek beds. With his leg, that's no easy ride." Micah's eyes flashed. "I can walk." Alina smiled faintly. "You're brave, but bravery doesn't heal wounds." Grayson stood and paced once across the cabin. "We'll make a travois, something to pull behind the horse. That'll carry him easy." Alina looked toward the window, where sunlight poured through a thin frost. "Then we go soon," she said, "before the men return." "Tomorrow at first light," Grayson decided. "We'll pack what we need and head for the agency." The day passed in a flurry of quiet preparation. Grayson mended a broken harness and patched the saddle blanket. Alina baked hard biscuits and dried strips of rabbit meat for the road. When Micah tried to help, she smiled and told him he could help best by getting well. By afternoon, Grayson had built the travois. 2 long poles dragged behind the horse, crossed with rawhide strips and padded with an old blanket. It would hold the boy steady for the journey. As the sun lowered, Alina stepped outside and stood at the edge of the clearing. The sky above was awash of pink and violet, the mountain ridges glowing like the edges of a dream. Grayson joined her, his boots crunching softly on the snow. "It's a pretty world," she murmured. "Hard to believe men can ruin it so easy." "Men ruin things faster than the wind moves," he said, "but sometimes they fix them too." She looked up at him. "Do you ever think God lets us break things so we'll learn to mend them?" He thought about that for a moment. "I reckon he does. But mending takes longer than most folks like." They stood in silence as the sun slipped behind the ridge. For a brief second, the light turned everything gold: the snow, the trees, even the cabin's smoke. Inside, they shared a simple supper. Micah ate little, but his eyes were brighter. Before they slept, Grayson checked his rifle again, loaded it, and laid it within reach. That night, Alina dreamed of water. She saw a river wide as a valley, flowing through hands that tried to catch it but couldn't. When she woke before dawn, she found herself holding the Bible against her chest like a lifeline. Grayson was already up, packing their gear. The fire was low, and the air sharp with cold. "We leave in an hour," he said. Alina dressed quickly and began folding the blankets. Micah watched them from the cot, pale but smiling. "It feels like we're running from something," he said. Grayson looked over. "We're not running. We're heading toward what's right." The boy nodded, reassured. By the time the sun rose, the horse was saddled, the travois secured, and the map wrapped safely in wax paper inside Alina's pack. They stepped out into a world white and gleaming. The trail ahead wound down through the trees toward the valley. Grayson looked back once at the cabin, their brief refuge. Smoke curled from the chimney, fading into the bright sky. "You ready?" he asked. Alina met his gaze. "I think so." "Then let's move." He led the horse forward, the travois gliding smoothly behind. Alina walked beside it, one hand resting on the frame near Micah's shoulder. The boy smiled faintly. "It's warm today," he said. "Not for long," Grayson replied. "Storms brewing again by evening." They made good time through the morning, stopping only once to rest and drink. The snow on the trail was deep in places, and the horse struggled now and then, but Grayson's calm voice kept the animal steady. Around midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. From there, the world spread wide before them. Pines, a frozen creek, and far to the east, the faint line of the railroad roadbed cutting through the hills like a scar. Alina shaded her eyes. "That's where they built the pipe," she said quietly. Micah followed her gaze. "Yes. Our people can't fish there anymore. The water's poison now." Grayson's jaw tightened. "Then we're doing the right thing." They started down the slope. The snow grew shallower as the trees thinned, and the air carried the scent of sage and smoke. By late afternoon, the clouds gathered again, dark and heavy. When they reached the bottom of the ridge, Grayson called a halt. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. "We're still a day from the agency." He built a small fire in a hollow sheltered by rocks. Alina unpacked food, while Grayson rubbed down the horse. Micah watched the flames, eyes distant. "They'll come after us again?" the boy said suddenly. "You know that." Grayson met his gaze across the fire. "Maybe. But we've got something they don't. Truth." Alina nodded, adding softly, "And a little faith." Micah smiled weakly. "Then maybe that's enough." Night came fast. They huddled near the fire as snow began to fall again, gentle this time. The world around them felt vast and quiet, as though holding its breath. Before they lay down to rest, Grayson took out the Bible, laying it beside the firelight. "Tomorrow we give this to someone who can make it right," he said. Alina reached out, her hand brushing his. "And maybe," she whispered, "we'll both find peace in doing it." Grayson looked at her then, really looked, and saw not the saloon girl the town had mocked, but the woman who had fought to save a child and carry truth through a frozen wilderness. "Maybe we will," he said softly. The fire crackled, snow drifted down, and in the distance the sound of a wolf's cry echoed through the dark, lonely, haunting, but alive. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the ground glittering under a pale sky. Frost hung from every pine branch, and the creek beside their camp murmured softly under its thin lid of ice. Grayson stirred the fire back to life, while Alina packed what little food they had left. Micah, wrapped in a blanket on the travois, blinked awake and gave a small, tired smile. "Morning," he whispered. "Morning, son," Grayson said. "We've got a full day ahead." They ate a quick breakfast, hard biscuits and cold coffee, then started down the trail again. The sun rose slow, throwing long gold stripes between the trees. Their breath fogged in front of them as they moved. Grayson led the horse, watching every bend in the path. He knew men like Talbot didn't give up easy. By mid-morning they reached open country. The snow here was thinner, melted in patches where the earth breathed warmth. From the ridge they could see smoke from the railroad camp curling into the sky. Alina stopped, clutching her shawl tighter. "They're close," she said. Grayson nodded. "Closer than I'd like." They pressed on, keeping to the trees as long as they could. Around noon, Micah stirred on the travois. "I hear water," he said faintly. Grayson listened. Sure enough, the rush of a river reached them, the broad silver fork marking the halfway point to the agency. But the bridge ahead was lined with men. 3 wagons, rifles leaning against their sides, and a flag bearing the company's mark. Alina's heart clenched. "We can't go that way." "No," Grayson said. "We'll take the lower ford." He turned the horse down a side trail, barely wide enough for 2 men to pass. Snow gave way to mud, and the air grew colder as the sun slipped behind clouds. They followed the narrow path for an hour, until the river came into view again, wide, gray, and half-frozen. The current hissed beneath plates of ice. Grayson tested the bank with his boot. "It's shallow enough here," he said. "Hold tight." He led the horse into the water. The cold bit through his boots instantly, but he kept going, step by careful step. Alina followed, guiding the travois so it didn't tip. Micah gritted his teeth as icy spray hit his face. The horse snorted but kept steady. When they reached the far bank, Grayson turned to help Alina climb up. Her hand slipped. For one terrifying instant, her foot plunged into the river. He caught her arm and pulled her close, his grip firm. "Easy," he said. "You're all right." She nodded, breathless. Their eyes met for a brief second, something wordless passing between them, gratitude and fear and something warmer. They moved on until they found dry ground. The agency road lay just beyond a rise. Grayson could see faint wagon tracks, a sign of recent travel. Relief washed through him. "We'll make camp near the ridge," he said. "Tomorrow we reach Miss Hart." That night, they built a small fire under a rocky overhang. The wind sighed through the canyon, and the stars hung low and bright above them. Micah slept deeply, his wound no longer weeping. Alina sat beside the fire, rubbing her hands together. "Do you think the agency will listen?" she asked softly. "They'll listen to truth," Grayson said, "and to a map written by 2 men who tried to do right." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe my father's sins can rest at last." Grayson looked at her across the firelight, the glow warming her face. "Maybe yours can too," he said gently. She blinked back, sudden tears. "And yours?" He stirred the coals, sending up a shower of sparks. "Maybe that's what this road's about." The mountain wind carried the sound of the river below, steady and unending. For the first time in a long while, hope felt close enough to touch. By first light, the campfire had burned down to ash. The morning air carried the scent of wet pine and the promise of snow again. Grayson rose quietly, checking the horse and tightening the travois ropes. Alina was already awake, folding blankets with careful hands. Micah slept soundly, his face turned toward the light. "Best we start soon," Grayson said. "The agency's still half a day ahead." Alina nodded, fastening her shawl. "Do you think Miss Hart will believe us?" "She's fair," he said. "She keeps her word. That counts for a lot out here." By mid-morning, they were moving again, the sound of the horses' hooves steady on the frozen earth. The land began to change. Open fields gave way to split-rail fences, and the first sign of civilization appeared. Smoke rising from the chimneys of the U.S. Indian Agency outpost. Micah pushed himself upright on the travois, his eyes bright. "That's it," he said, voice weak but proud. "That's the place." Grayson smiled. "You've got good eyes, boy." When they reached the gates, 2 guards stepped forward, rifles slung easy but alert. One of them recognized Micah immediately and lowered his weapon. "That's Chief Navi's nephew," he said. "Bring him in, quick!" They were ushered into a long, low building with whitewashed walls. The warmth hit them like a blessing. Inside, a tall woman in a gray dress and wire spectacles looked up from a desk covered in ledgers. "Miss Hart," one guard said, "they've brought something you'll want to see." Miss Eliza Hart stood, her posture crisp, her expression curious but kind. "You've come far," she said. "Sit down and tell me why." Alina unfolded the Bible from her pack, her fingers trembling. "We have proof," she said softly. "Proof that the railroad stole Ute land and water." Miss Hart adjusted her spectacles. "Proof? Let me see." Alina opened the Bible and laid the map across the desk. The clerk's eyes widened as she traced the old pencil lines and faded signatures. "Good heavens," she murmured. "These markings match the original treaty filings, but someone changed them later." Grayson nodded. "That's what got the boy hunted." Micah spoke up, his voice small but steady. "My uncle said the water must be returned. It's the tribe's life." Miss Hart straightened. "And he's right. This is enough to call a hearing, but we'll need the chief's word as well." Grayson's jaw tightened. "Then we'll wait for him." Miss Hart smiled faintly. "You've done brave work bringing this here. Rest now. I'll telegraph for Chief Navi and the county judge at once." They were given a small room at the back of the agency to rest. Alina sank onto a cot, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Grayson poured her water and sat across from her. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did it." Micah slept again, the weight of the journey easing from his young shoulders. Outside, the telegraph clicked in quick bursts as Miss Hart sent word down the line. Grayson leaned his elbows on his knees, staring at the glowing stove. "You ever think," he said slowly, "maybe the Lord don't always speak loud, just through the right people at the right time?" Alina smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then maybe he just spoke through us?" Grayson looked at her, warmth rising in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt peace settle deep and sure, like a seed finally finding good soil. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and forgiving, as if the mountain itself approved. The storm lifted overnight, leaving behind a pale sunrise that painted the agency yard gold. Grayson woke first, his breath a small cloud in the cool air. He stepped outside to find Miss Hart already speaking with 2 mounted riders near the gate. One of them, a Ute scout with a blue blanket draped across his shoulders, lifted a hand in greeting. Inside, Alina helped Micah sit up. His leg, though stiff, looked better by the hour. "Miss Hart sent word to your uncle," she said softly. "He's coming." Micah smiled faintly. "Then we'll have truth at last." Grayson returned to the room, dusting snow from his hat. "We leave for Silver Junction today," he said. "The judge will hold the hearing there." Alina's eyes widened. "Already?" "Miss Hart moves quick," he said. "Best not give Talbot more time to twist things." By mid-morning, they were on the road again. Grayson riding ahead, Alina beside him on a borrowed mare, and Micah bundled in a wagon seat driven by the Ute scout. The valley lay open before them, the peaks gleaming white against the blue. They rode slow, the horses' hooves crunching frozen earth. Alina glanced at Grayson now and then, her cheeks pink from the wind. "It feels strange," she said, "heading back to the same town that threw me out." He looked at her steadily. "Sometimes a person's got to walk through where they were broken to show they're still standing." She smiled faintly. "You always talk like that?" "Only when the Lord sneaks words in my mouth," he said, and that earned him her first real laugh. By noon, they reached the valley floor. Smoke from Silver Junction's chimneys rose in the distance. The closer they came, the more Alina's shoulders stiffened. The place looked the same. Same boardwalk, same saloon porch. But the weight she felt was different now. She wasn't coming as the woman they'd mocked. She was coming as the one carrying truth. The marshal met them near the depot, hat in hand. "Boone," he said gruffly, Didn't expect to see you bring in company." Grayson dismounted. "We're here for the hearing. Miss Hart sent word ahead." The marshal nodded. "Judge is due by the afternoon train. You'll wait in the church hall." They followed him through the familiar streets. Folks stopped to stare. Some whispered. Alina kept her chin high, clutching the Bible to her chest. Micah walked close behind, limping but steady, his small frame radiating quiet courage. When they reached the church, Pastor Whitlow stood waiting on the steps. His face broke into a warm smile. "You made it," he said, gripping Grayson's hand, "and you brought light with you." "Maybe enough to chase the dark," Grayson answered. Inside, the benches were lined with townsfolk already murmuring. Talbot stood near the front, his coat immaculate, eyes cold as iron. When he saw Alina, his jaw tightened. "Well," he drawled, "if it ain't the mountain man and his charity case." Grayson didn't rise to the bait. "We're here for truth, not talk." Talbot smirked. "Truth's what a man can prove. And lies," Grayson said evenly, "are what you can't hide forever." Before Talbot could answer, Miss Hart entered with the county judge and Chief Navi walking beside her. The room fell silent. Alina felt Micah grip her sleeve. The chief's presence filled the hall, calm, strong, dignified. "Let's begin," the judge said. As he took his seat, sunlight streamed through the church window and fell across the Bible in Alina's hands, bright as if the heavens themselves had drawn a line between right and wrong. And for the first time, she believed they might just win. The church hall filled with the sound of boots and whispered prayers. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, catching dust in golden beams. Grayson stood near the front beside Alina, while Micah sat quietly between Miss Hart and Chief Navi. Talbot leaned against a post, his eyes sharp and smug. Judge Farrow cleared his throat. "We are gathered to settle a matter of water rights and trespass. Miss Hart, you have evidence to present?" "Yes, Your Honor." Miss Hart stepped forward, unfolding the parchment map with deliberate care. "This document was drawn by Surveyor James Duval and Ute Chief Navi. It proves the railroad diverted water from tribal springs without consent." Talbot scoffed. "That paper's old scribble. My company's deeds are signed by government men, not ghosts." The judge raised a brow. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Talbot." He turned to Alina. "Miss Duval, you're the surveyor's daughter?" She nodded. "I am. My father regretted what he did. He hid this map inside his Bible so it wouldn't be lost again. The lines here match the treaty Chief Navi signed years before." The room stirred. A few townsfolk who'd once jeered at her now watched in quiet awe. Chief Navi rose, his voice calm but firm. "These marks are mine. This spring is our people's heart. You took its flow to make engines run, but it was never yours to take." Miss Hart handed the judge a ledger copy verifying the signatures. The judge studied it a long while, then looked to Talbot. "Do you deny these alterations?" Talbot's jaw worked. "I don't know who made them," he muttered. "Could have been the girl's father." Alina's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "He sinned, yes, but he also repented. You can't say the same." The room went still. Even Talbot dropped his gaze. Judge Farrow tapped the table. "Until proven otherwise, the spring belongs to the Ute Nation. Any further interference will be prosecuted under treaty law." A murmur rose through the crowd. Astonishment, relief, even a few amens. Alina let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Grayson placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip gentle, steady. "You did it," he whispered. She looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "No," she said softly. "We did." Outside, The church bell began to ring. Slow, solemn, and beautiful. It carried across the valley, echoing against the mountains. Talbot pushed past the crowd, muttering curses as he went. Miss Hart gathered the documents with a small, proud smile. Chief Navi clasped Grayson's hand. "You kept faith, Mountain Man. The land remembers." Grayson nodded. "And so will we." As the people spilled out into the sunlight, Alina turned her face toward the mountains. The wind brushed her cheek, clean and cold. For the first time, she didn't feel filthy at all. When the bell's echo faded, the townsfolk drifted into the street, talking in hushed, awed voices. The winter sun sat low, gilding the rooftops in gold. Grayson stepped onto the boardwalk beside Alina, the cold air biting his lungs but feeling cleaner than it had in years. She held the Bible close against her chest. "I never thought this town would see me stand here again," she said quietly. "They see you different now," he answered. "You showed them what truth looks like." Miss Hart passed by, papers tucked under her arm. "You two should rest," she said kindly. "The chief and I will see this filing through." Micah limped toward them, a grin tugging at his mouth. "My uncle says the water will run free again." Alina knelt to hug him. "Then your people will have life again," she whispered. Grayson looked towards the mountains where smoke from the rail camp curled faintly upward. "Talbot won't forget," he murmured. "No," Alina said, "but I'm not afraid anymore." The church bell rang once more, softer this time. It sounded like forgiveness. Grayson offered her his arm, and together they walked toward the horse waiting at the hitch post. Behind them, the town stood quiet, changed. The sun dipped lower, and their shadows stretched long across the snow. Two souls once broken, now walking home. The next morning dawned bright and windless. Frost glimmered on every fence rail as Grayson saddled the horse outside the church. Alina came down the steps with Micah, the Bible tucked beneath her arm. The town still slept, quiet after yesterday's upheaval. "Miss Hart says the railroad's been ordered to pull their stakes," Alina said softly. Grayson nodded. Justice finally found its feet. Micah grinned, standing straighter. "My uncle's waiting at the agency. He says the spring's already run clearer." "That's the Lord's work," Grayson said, smiling. They rode out of Silver Junction slow, their breath turning to mist in the morning cold. Behind them, the church bell gave a single farewell ring. Ahead, the mountains shimmered beneath new snow. Halfway up the trail, Alina looked back. "It doesn't hurt anymore," she said. "The shame, the names they called me, it's all gone." Grayson glanced at her. "Snow covers everything in time," he said, "but grace keeps it clean." At the ridge, the cabin came into view, smoke already rising from the chimney. The home they'd built from mercy waited for them. As they dismounted, Alina reached for his hand. "We started here," she whispered. "Seems right we come back to it new." Grayson squeezed her fingers, his voice low. "Then let's begin again." The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, a promise of peace in the quiet mountain morning. Days passed gently on the mountain. The snow softened, dripping from the eaves in slow, steady rhythm. Grayson stacked wood by the shed, while Alina tended the fire inside, her humming soft and sure. Micah, steadier on his feet now, fed the hens they'd traded for at the agency. Laughter, small, cautious at first, became part of their mornings. One evening, Grayson sat on the porch, sharpening his knife as the sun fell red behind the peaks. Alina came out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Feels different now," she said, "like the mountains breathing easier." "It's us that's changed," he replied. "Not the mountain." She smiled. Maybe both. Micah appeared in the doorway, holding the Bible. Uncle says to send this back to him, he said. But he wants you to keep the map copy. He said truth should stay where it was found. Alina took the worn book, holding it close. Then it'll stay here. Safe. As night settled, the three of them watched the first stars blink awake above the ridge. The firelight from the cabin glowed through the window like a heartbeat. Grayson spoke softly. You know, I reckon the Lord gave us a second start. Alina nodded. And this time, she said, we'll use it right. The mountains seemed to agree, whispering with the wind as spring crept quietly back into their lives. Spring thawed the last of the snow, turning the creek beside the cabin into a clear, singing ribbon. Grayson repaired the fence, while Alina planted early seeds in a patch of dark soil. Micah chased a stray hen through the yard, laughing. A sound that made Grayson pause just to listen. That evening, they gathered by the water. Pastor Whitlow had ridden up from town, smiling beneath his travel-worn hat. The land's been made right, he said. Now it's your turn. Alina stepped into the creek, the water lapping her boots. Grayson joined her, hand steady in hers. The pastor bowed his head and prayed. When the water touched her palms, Alina whispered, I'm clean, inside and out. Grayson's eyes glistened. So am I, he said softly. The creek sparkled in the sunset like grace made visible. Evening settled warm over the mountains. The cabin glowed with lamplight, and supper's scent filled the air. Grayson sat carving a spoon while Alina read aloud from the worn Bible. Micah dozed by the hearth, a smile on his face. Outside, the creek murmured softly, carrying away winter's last chill. Grayson looked at Alina, his heart full. Feels like peace, he said. She reached across the table, touching his hand. Feels like home. The lantern flickered, steady and golden, as the mountain held them close in quiet grace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.